Okay, I've done a smoothie. Here it is. Let's see. Yeah, it's good. Got a little bit of that hemp, but it's all right. I don't mind it. Tastes like it should do you something good. Anyway, thank you. Hello and welcome to Post-Exertional Mayonnaise, a podcast about living with ME and chronic illness, creativity and making meaning. This week, this episode, whatever you want to call it, I'm Daniel, by the way, because I always keep forgetting to introduce myself. I'm Daniel and I'm joined by Rachel Riggs today. Rachel is also known as the Food Phenom on Instagram, and she's a food and nutrition fanatic, is that the right word? Living with ME in San Diego in the USA. Rachel's book, All in Good Taste, is out next year, and music artist Jason Morz has endorsed the book, saying, All in Good Taste is destined to become an essential resource for everyone who seeks vibrant, healthful food and thoughtful flavour combinations and a decidedly California vibe. So there we go. Thank you for joining us, Rachel.
It's great to be here. And Dove, we missed you. Dove, we missed you.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's great to be here.
Yeah, thank you. Just to start with, how did Jason Mraz come to endorse your book? Because that's quite a high praise, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I feel really fortunate. It was sort of a long process of cultivation, but it started with he lives about 40 miles from here, just a bit north of me, on an
Yeah.
avocado and coffee farm.
Oh wow.
And that's where he writes all his music. A lot of his uh, songwriters live around him. He's got kind of a compound there of all of his favorite people. And my friend and acupuncturist, Adrian, is also his acupuncturist. So,
uh,
so he made the initial introduction, and then it was kind of a process, a really slow process of first one of his songwriters asked me to bake a cake for them because they were avoiding sugar. Then a different songwriter, I think it might have been one of his band members, wanted a cake, and it sort of started off that way. Eventually, when he was going on tour 2 years ago with Raining Jane, he asked me if I would do the snacks for their tour buses. And so it's been a process of getting to know each other and ultimately his generous act of giving me that endorsement. Yeah.
that's
So,
brilliant.
but as is with all things ME, everything that I try to make look really effortless and seamless is a
Hmm.
really big deal to people with MS. Or ME rather. So for example, he's like, can you do some snacks for our tour buses? And there were two tour buses and I'm trying to figure out how many people. And so it's like, oh, sure, sure. Right. And then it's like my husband takes multiple days off work. I'm planning weeks in advance, ordering things from Amazon, sending them back. I can't go shop for like the suitable containers. There's all these various components that to anybody else would be relatively effortless. But it's always a big deal when you have ME. And, it's only because of the help of my husband that I can make it look effortless. But
Hmm.
yeah. So anyway, so it was, it's really great to have his endorsement. And he's just a really generous guy. So yeah.
Hmm. No, you make a really interesting point about trying to make things look effortless, and yeah, the things that
Yep.
other people maybe see from the outside, and
Oh
it's
yeah.
almost like a no-win situation, isn't it? Because if you make it look effortless, people think it was effortless and then don't understand the sort of like the sort of the pain and the sort of pressure and everything that's gone
Yeah.
through kind of going through something to make something happen, isn't it? And it's a really tough one,
It's
that.
a
Yeah.
double-edged sword, but when it comes to business and me trying to keep a foot in the door and get a cookbook across the finish line and find an agent to represent me and then a publisher, which I now have, but they don't care about those things. In fact,
Mm.
they're taking a big risk with an author, particularly with a cookbook, and so you cannot let them see. So it's like they just cannot see that side, or they won't believe that you can get it across the finish line. So
Mm.
it took some pretty grand efforts to. You're probably too young to remember Weekend at Bernie's.
Yeah,
Oh my
no.
gosh, I'm totally dating myself. Whatever. But well, it was
It rings a
basically a
bell,
movie where
but
they
yeah.
prop this dead guy up. And I'm like,
Okay.
we always just joke, like in my head, like it's always Weekend at Bernie's. It's like time to prop myself up, employ every single strategy and tactic and drug available to me when I have to make something big like that happen. And I just do. And somehow I get through it. So.
Yeah.
It's a different process for me as a cookbook author for sure. And to my knowledge, I'm the only, at least US disabled cookbook author currently. So
Wow.
yeah.
I mean, that's kind of a bit shocking, isn't it? Like when you, and I'm sure there's people out there, but yeah, the like you say,
Yeah.
it's almost like trying to get published and all that sort of thing, isn't it?
Yeah.
There should be
Yeah.
more representation. It's
Yeah.
incredible.
So
Wow.
as I say, I don't know that the hard part is behind me, but the injurious part is behind me for sure. I've turned in
Yeah.
the manuscript, and now we undergo multiple rounds of editing. The photography's been done, so it's a relief. Yeah,
Yeah. I'm just
yeah,
aware we're kind of like jumping in there, aren't we? Talking about cookbooks and things
yeah.
like that,
Sorry. I mean,
and
Jason Morz. That really was
yeah,
the
no,
impetus for
it's
our
I asked the question. Yeah,
introduction and stuff.
yeah,
Um,
it's a challenge, isn't it, to try and produce something, but then people think, oh well, they're not that ill necessarily, or actually it's not. Yeah, it's not as difficult as it is. But I'm sure you've put so much work into
oh
making it
yeah,
happen, and we'll get into a bit more of a discussion
yeah,
about
yeah,
the practicalities of that in a bit. But
yeah.
do you want to tell us a bit about yourself to start with? Because yeah, we sort of like
Oh my gosh. I mean, that's a bit
yeah.
over open ended. What?
Well, maybe tell us about your chronic illness journey, sort of
Yeah, yeah. So
how's that all
I was
played out?
slow but sudden onset. It's like many of us fit under that category of viral trigger. So I had a viral trigger, but it was sudden in that I know the day, but it was slow onset. So I was mild for the first almost decade, and therefore with symptoms that seemed so disparate for a good half of that time, I really just thought I needed to snap out of it. One of the
Mm,
things that was very severe in me was heat sensitivity, and I hiked every day. And so, I was started getting dizzy and all these things, but we were like, oh my gosh, San Diego's gotten so hot, as one does,
mm,
right? It's not me, it's you. And so we actually moved up to the Seattle area to escape it. It was that severe for me. So we're back
mm,
in San Diego now. But so I had a sudden onset, but it was slow going until about 11 years ago. I can't say for sure what put me over the edge, but I've been mostly housebound now for the last 11 years. So,
mm.
yeah,
Wow,
yeah,
wow. And you were telling me before we've been planning this sort of podcast for a little while, haven't we?
yeah,
And we've sort of chatted over email and messenger and things like that. And you were telling us a bit about the process for you in terms of like getting diagnosed. Like
mm,
what was that process like? Because I think you said you were misdiagnosed. Is that right? And I
yeah.
wonder how
Mhm.
common that is for people with ME, particularly because there's so many questions. But
Yeah.
how did they go about misdiagnosing you with MS? Because that sounds like a big challenge, doesn't it? In terms of
Yeah.
how that came about.
Well, it's interesting because an MS diagnosis, there are now diagnostic tools like an MRI,
Yeah,
but there's no definitive diagnosis. It still
got you.
requires interpretation and sort of a collection of things. And so I had all these seemingly disparate symptoms, but it wasn't until dizziness presented for an extended period of time that anybody took me seriously. And dizziness can be so many things that's when they did an MRI. And I would say that it was probably a weak diagnosis. I had a couple lesions on my brain, but
Mm,
my understanding is that you can get those from migraines. And so I
okay.
think the key is, do they resolve or not? Ultimately mine resolved, but not immediately. So I got what I consider sort of a weak diagnosis, but a diagnosis nevertheless. And they put me on a MS drug called Copaxone. And when I moved up to the Seattle area with my husband, I had opened a specialty food shop up there. And that's when, and I was really struggling physically. I didn't actually have the cognitive issues at that point, thank gosh, and I didn't know what was wrong with me. I mean, there were days, as many people with ME can relate, before you get a diagnosis, the only thing we could surmise is that I was dying of cancer. Nothing else made
Wow.
sense, that somebody could be so sick. So getting that diagnosis was both a relief. It was some answers that made sense. And it was also the cue that I wasn't getting better, because I just thought, oh, there's got to be some magic switch. It came on suddenly. We'll figure it out. But that's when I decided to sell my shop, because I thought this is going to be, a bit of a haul. And so I had the diagnosis. I was on a very expensive injectable, an MS injectable called Copaxone, and it made me better. So it was only after I anaphylaxed to it. Um, it is a drug. Well, that's a whole other. There's so many rabbit holes to be had, but I,
Yeah,
I
yeah,
won't go there.
yeah.
Anyway, so many, right? But anyway, it wasn't until after I anaphylaxed to it and I started getting worse that I started searching for answers. I knew I didn't have MS when I got worse, because
Mm,
this drug doesn't make you better with MS. Its only aim is to halt
yeah.
progression, but it made me better, as in full return to the gym, you know. So I headed to the Mayo Clinic because, well, I figured out that I had POTS. So I figured that out on my own. And this whole universe that we exist in now, I wasn't any part of it. So somehow I figured out that
Mm,
I had POTS. I was told that the autonomic clinic, the best autonomic clinic, was in Rochester at Mayo. And so I went there for 2 weeks and got the full battery of tests. And that's where, so 12 years after this began, that's where I got the what they called chronic fatigue syndrome and hyperadrenergic POTS diagnosis.
mm,
So,
mm.
yep,
Yeah.
12 years.
And do you want to tell us a little bit about the I guess the extent to which the MS medication helped, and like you said, you sort of got better. So, did you have a period of recovery, or did it just like improve your ME to a certain extent, or and then you were telling us also about
Yeah,
how sort of Stanford University became involved as well in terms of being interested in what happened to you, because
yeah,
that's quite an unusual thing to
yeah.
have
Well,
happened.
so, oh gosh, ME brain. Start with the first question over again. I'm sorry, like my
Sorry,
experience
I
with
probably
copa.
asked too much, and
Yeah,
now
yeah,
my
I'm
ME
sorry.
brain is like making me wonder what
Oh
I
no,
asked.
I'm sorry.
No, no, no. It's don't worry. We were talking about oh, so the MS, and then yeah, sorry, it was two
Oh,
parts. I
how
probably
did I
asked.
sort of put those pieces of the puzzle together?
I guess it
Like that it
was
was helping my
did
ME?
yeah, and also I guess your recovery, like you said sort of almost
Oh,
like you
and
were
to what degree did I recover?
better.
Okay, sure,
Yeah,
sure.
yeah.
I think it's a really hard thing to quantify, because I didn't know that I had ME, right? And some of
Mm,
the symptoms that I went on to develop when I was severe, I didn't have then. But what I definitely had, like I didn't have all the food sensitivities back then, they were just starting. Um, but so I know that it did not help my heat sensitivity, but energy. It restored my energy. Again, it's hard to quantify, but I was going to the gym 3 to 5 days a week, hitting it hard, body pump, stuff like that.
mm,
Um, so the way I figured it out was, I was like, what is the other mechanism here? And I was doing a lot of research online, the beginning of, that whole side that we all live in now. But um, I found some, if I remember correctly, I found some obscure study out of like UAB that said, while not the intended action for MS, that it has B cell modifying properties. So I thought, well, it must be working on my immune system in a different way. I think there's something here. And I ended up talking to Ron Davis up at Stanford about it. I'm like, this is my theory, my hypothesis, just a layperson. But what I know for sure is that it helped me. And at first, they were resistant. I wrote to Jared Younger back in the day at UAB, all these people, and I'm sure they just thought, they're getting these random emails. It was actually Dr. Navio, um, ultimately, that really pressed Dr. Ron Davis to take a look. So because they're PhDs and not MDs, they actually have a hard time um, getting the drug even. So I
Wow.
got them some Copaxone, flew it up there, gave them my blood also, and they were making that nanometer at the time. And anyway, they've gone on from there to study it more in depth and see that it does work on some patients. I'm sure they could speak better to the mechanism and that sort of thing if they even know, but
Mm.
it does seem to help in a subset of patients. The problem is that, well, first of all, I can no longer take it because I anaphylaxed. But the other thing is that it's a really expensive drug and it's only FDA approved in MS. So if somebody had a dual diagnosis, fantastic.
Mm.
But yeah, for
So
now.
it's almost like one of those really difficult kind of like I'm trying to think what the word is. It's a conundrum in the sense that
Oh, yeah.
you can't do the research because how ethical is it? But then without doing the research, you can't prove that it's or evidence. Sorry, maybe not prove is the right word, but you can't evidence that it's having some effectiveness. So yeah,
I
it
mean, it's
sounds
complicated. Yeah, it's not something you can just, it's not over the counter, you know?
yeah, yeah,
So I think
yeah.
something might come of it eventually. If nothing else happens sooner, I think there's potential for something to come of that eventually. It's just a
Mm,
long haul, you know?
mm, yeah.
So,
So it'll be interesting to see what the
and
future
then I got the CFS
holds.
diagnosis and it all made sense, you know,
Mm.
what
And
they
then
were calling CFS.
did your condition then sort of your ME CFS condition decline again after you sort of
Yeah.
had to stop
Well, and
taking
what's
that?
interesting is I, of course, had never heard of post-exertional malaise. I didn't know that
Yeah,
pushing myself harmed myself. I was still pushing myself. And the 2 weeks of intense activity at Mayo, I mean, Mayo is its own little city and
yeah, I
it's a
bet.
well-oiled machine and they've got appointments set up all day long. And there's a lot of hope in going there too, you know, and but the actual act of going there, when I came home, I was so much worse and so desperate.
Mm,
Didn't really know anything about CFS. And I remember calling my doctor and just saying like, I'm scared. I'm so much worse. I'm so scared. And they offered to liberate me of $20,000 for their GET program, their graded exercise therapy
mm,
program, which we all know is, you know, disastrous in ME. So the thing that saved me, there's like all these little tidbits, but the thing that saved me was just a cursory search. I had not looked up CFS. I didn't know anything about it.
mm,
And the first search I did landed me on Court's Health Rising page and the article, a very key article about graded exercise therapy. And
mm.
it was the thing that saved us from, I remember it was a $9,000 down payment. So that was
Wow.
going on a credit card. We just paid
Yeah.
$15,000 to go to Mayo. And it was a month there. You know, it was going to be about 20 grand. And of course, people do desperate things. And it was
Mm.
really, I mean, I will never forget his site 100% saved me from not only that expense, but getting worse. So,
I think it's just it's shocking in a way, isn't it, to think that we know that the graded exercise therapy is
yeah,
so damaging and so dangerous, and so many people within the ME community have been exposed to that and been
have
damaged
lived
by
it.
it.
Oh,
But
yeah,
but
and been
but
damaged. Yeah.
but the almost insulting nature of being charged $20,000 for that for the privilege of being abused
Oh,
in that way is
oh
just
no. I mean, I
incredible,
say
isn't
it with full venomous, you know, liberate me of 20,000.
it?
Like,
Yeah,
yeah. And thankfully, I mean, it's taken all these years. That was 2015 that all this occurred.
right.
Um, it's taken, I think, until very recently for them to change their tune, change their website, change their literature, you know, to reflect the cause that exercise causes. So, yeah,
Mm,
but we're
yeah,
there, right? And
yeah,
it's like,
yeah.
it's a really celebratory step.
Mm.
So,
And what does it like? And we're going to get onto sort of talk about food and nutrition and things. I was wondering what does like because you said you're sort of mostly housebound, and
yeah.
what does a day look like in your life? Because it's a question I usually mean to ask people, and I don't get
Yeah,
round to it often. And I think what does that mean in reality, sort of for you?
sure. It
What does
looks,
a
I
day
think,
look
very
like?
different I think it looks different for different people, and I
Mm,
always find that interesting in other people too. One of the kind of barometers for me it's when you try to suss out maybe with a friend, like, what's your level of functionality?
mm.
One of the barometers for me is how often people shower, because that's like a universal human experience. You want to
Yeah,
feel human, right?
yeah,
And so what I don't do, I can tell you that, is shower. I mean, I shower and do my hair once a week, and
yeah.
then it even has to be strategic. It's real strategic.
Mm,
And if possible, I like to even have my husband here in case something happens. So, but on the flip side, the good news is that because, and only because, like we always say this, my husband and I, because we don't have kids, plants, or pets, um, and only because of that, I can live a richer life in terms of like recipe development and the things that I really love. So it leaves some
mm,
space strategically to do the things that I really love. So I'd
mm,
say that we try to create the most quality indoor life that we can. My husband is actually an indoor enthusiast. So, um, he's fine. Unlike a lot of people are married to real adventurers, and
yeah,
that makes it
yeah,
really hard on a spouse. But in my case, he says the only thing wrong with the great outdoors is it's outdoors.
yeah, 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 yeah.
So,
Yeah. I feel I've got used to being indoors, but I miss the
yeah,
outdoors. Yeah,
I do too.
yeah.
Yeah.
It's a challenge, but yeah, yeah. It is a really good measure, that, isn't it? The showering thing. Yeah, I've managed to shower today, but yeah, it's a few days, and it is an interesting one because it's just the overall impact, isn't it?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And I
I
know
have to
when I'm having
recover from a shower.
yeah, I know when I'm having a slightly better period when I'm having like 2 showers a week. It's like
No, see,
luxury.
it's really it
It's like,
does
oh, I
serve as
think
a
I'll have
good
a shower,
barometer.
and yeah, yeah, it
Yeah,
is.
it's true.
Yeah.
Well, and then like I don't know about you, but it's also planning it around if I know I have one thing that week, I really need to plan it around that thing, both so
Mm,
that I look human and feel fresh, and also, I mean, yeah, it takes a lot of strategy.
mm,
So,
yeah.
but yes, after 11 years, it's not the life I planned, but like we have found a way to
Mm,
create a happy life here. Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
good. Yeah. Um. So yeah, what? So you were clearly sort of like really passionate about food and nutrition before you kind of became ill, and you were running a shop. Was that right? And do you want to tell us a bit about that, and
Yeah.
then your passion for food? Where does
Yeah.
that come from?
Well, I would say that actually the passion wasn't for nutrition at all. At all. It was food and wine and specialty food.
Right.
So procuring all the best cheeses from all over the world, finding them from little farms that I could order direct from, and big distributors couldn't get their hands on those things. So finding really special foods from small producers all over the world, charcuterie, wines, um, everything from like olives and chocolates and all kinds of stuff. So yes, it was my absolute passion for sure. And my shop, Quel Fromage, um, yeah, I mean it was cool.
Mm.
But the
And
nutrition thing came later out of necessity, I would say. So I wasn't into nutrition at all. Um, I definitely leaned towards whole foods, but no, it was really out of necessity. When I started developing sensitivities to food, and certain foods made me feel worse, and just my body was so sick that I wanted to give it every tool I possibly could. There's so few things within our control,
mm,
that the things that I can take control of, and there's still limitations, right? We've got energy limitations, we've got food restrictions, we've got all these barriers, but anything that's within my control, I want to take it. So that's kind of
mm,
how the nutritional component came to be. Um, it was more kind of a crowding out of the bad foods, and then what's left is the really good foods, and also coming to realize that, uh, for so many reasons, our food doesn't contain the same nutrients that it once did. So even a healthy person needs more than they once did. Like, it used to be enough to eat like your grandmother, and that's just not true today. So, so it's
Mm.
adding in just any little tool I can get my paws on,
Mm.
you know?
Yeah, it's interesting because we've talked and you shared a recipe with me. I don't even know if I'm allowed to
Oh, the
talk about it. I
smoothie.
don't.
Oh, sure,
Yeah,
sure. Yeah. Smoothie recipe.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I Rachel shared a recipe with me last week, and I sort of went out and managed to online get the ingredients, and then yeah, and I made it and had it, and certainly I'm hoping that, and I've done about, I think I've done 4 days out of 5 so far. So I
Wow.
ran out of bananas.
You are truly,
So,
you are morally superior.
yeah, yeah, I'm
As
doing,
we like to say around here, we have to have
yeah,
something. You are morally superior.
because
Um,
I've done my smoothie. But yeah, I've enjoyed it, and it's been not too onerous, like, for me to
yeah,
make it, and I think that's one of the things that you were talking about in your book in terms of trying to find things that
yeah,
um I mean, the book's not necessarily for people with ME, is it? But it's kind
no.
of keeping
Mm-mm.
that in mind, I think, for in
Well,
terms of the
and
way
it's
that you,
not even intentionally keeping it in mind for the reader.
right.
It's what is necessitated for me to make food, right? And plus,
Mm,
ultimately, I've discovered that everybody wants the same thing, whether your limitations are from chronic illness or you just have a busy life and you want healthy food, but how do you make that happen? I mean, it's kind of a universal desire, I think, but yes, I need the path of least resistance. I mean, the absolute path of you know, how can I slam a meal together? I mean, it really comes
mm,
down to that sometimes. Breakfast and lunch are easier, and that's why I have the everyday smoothie that you've been drinking lately. It's like the same thing every day. I know what I need. It's all there. It takes me minutes. Dinner's always a little bit more challenging. So, but sometimes it really comes down to how do you just, it depends on your energy and your situation and
mm,
you know, I've been a
yeah.
lot sicker than I am now, in fact. And there, there are times that I could only eat chicken and romaine and olive oil. And even then, I mean, just really, I, sorry, I'm just even thinking about it. It's like the fact that I had to just throw it together so quickly. So I've been at sort of many, not all, I've been at many ends of the spectrum. And,
Mm,
so even though the book, I think, has that benefit for everybody, yes, for us, we need the path of least resistance. Yeah.
mm. And it is a challenge, and it's really hard to sort of try and eat healthy. And I think for you, it was almost like you're saying it was like a necessity, almost, isn't it? That
Oh,
um,
absolutely.
and
Yeah.
like for some of us, like for me, I like aim to eat healthy. I've got kind of different people in my household that have got different sort of needs in terms of all different
Yeah.
palettes, I suppose. Is
Yeah.
that the right word?
Oh, yeah.
Um, so it's always a challenge to kind of like meet everybody's needs
Oh, for sure.
together.
Especially when there's
And
kids, right?
yeah, so but I think it's almost like trying to find ways to get the healthy stuff in there for ourselves as well, isn't it? And it's not
Yeah,
always easy. So yeah,
it's true.
it's a challenge at times, and sometimes it's like I've literally got, only enough energy to kind of shove something in the oven. So yeah, and
Hmm.
I can go through phases where I'm in the zone of eating healthily and losing
Hmm.
weight and things like that. But when then suddenly you sort of
Hmm.
like you take a dip, and it's like, and it's hard, isn't it? Because like food is one of the few things that we can enjoy often with ME, not necessarily for all of us like yourself. When
Yeah.
you get food intolerances, that must be really frustrating as well, because it can be one of the few things that you enjoy that
Yeah.
you kind of lose. So
Yeah.
was that a challenge for you in terms of having to sort of like adapt your diet almost to think about
Yeah.
how you could maybe enjoy food in a certain way, but it had to be in a, cutting out other things? It must have been hard.
I mean, in the beginning, when my doctor, when we were still searching for answers before I had a diagnosis, and we just couldn't figure it out. And this was like a functional medicine doc, and she put me on a very stringent elimination diet. I mean, shockingly so. But I still was like, I got this. I mean, I know my way around the kitchen. And I was shocked to see how challenging it was. I really didn't have my bearings. I was completely lost. And I remember the moment and where I was standing when I said to myself, like, it's all over. Like my life and food, like it's
Mm.
over. And then out of necessity, first it's sustenance. Then it's like, how am I just going to feed myself? And then that grew, I remember the first recipe that I developed and I was like, oh my gosh, this is good. Okay, this is something to build on. And then it just went from there. And then ultimately it made sense for me to put it in a cookbook. But in the beginning, it was incredibly daunting for somebody who's used to cooking and knows food. You know,
Yeah.
what do I do without all these things? So
Yeah.
it took time. Yeah, and I hope that my
Yeah.
cookbook will be the resource that frankly I didn't have when that
Mm.
happened. So yeah, it's a shift. And the other thing is in ME, our intolerances are highly variable, right? And
Mm.
unique to each of us. So there's no like, go to the ME handbook to see what you're allergic to. I mean,
Yeah.
it's
No.
seriously crazy town.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah. Um, so yeah, so it's been kind of like a while in the making, hasn't it? This cookbook. When
eight
did you start?
years.
Sort of 8 years.
8 years.
Wow. So you were saying that it's taken 8 years to sort of from the conception of the
Yeah.
idea, like so you were making the recipes yourself, and then you thought actually maybe this would be a great cookbook, and then how has that process been in terms of like the 8 years from kind of the initial conception of the idea to something that's kind of hopefully going to become, well, it will become something that's very tangible
Yeah.
in maybe like next year. So
Like,
um
what are the nuts and bolts of that?
has it been a difficult process, like I guess, like to go from sort of like from one end of the spectrum with it
Yeah.
being an idea to sort of like
Yeah.
something that's real? Is that been a difficult process? Has it been enjoyable for you?
The recipe development has been very enjoyable and rewarding, but the book deal process is really grueling for even a well person.
Mm.
So I would say, no, it was treacherous and it was hard and I wanted to give up so many times and I just couldn't. I was obsessed. I mean, I really was like, this is absurd. And then, of course, at some point you're in too deep, you know? And so it just, yeah, it was hard. I didn't have to start at the beginning in that I had experience writing a book proposal because I had a book deal when I started to write a book on artisan cheese when I got sicker and I had to walk away from that deal and
Oh
tell
yeah.
my agent, I actually can no longer eat these foods. So at least I had that background. So I started with a whole new proposal, and then you've got to get an agent, and you need a huge platform these days, especially now. So not as much 8 years ago, but today you're seeing a ton of like giant YouTubers and TikTokers,
Yeah.
and they might not necessarily write a good cookbook, but it only matters, unfortunately, it only matters what kind of numbers they bring to the table. And that's all fine and good, and that makes money and those sell things, but it doesn't necessarily create resources, right? So we
Mm.
still need really good cookbooks to exist. So yes, that whole thing was treacherous. Um, I ended up going through a couple different agents before I found the one that was the best fit and the best fit. And interestingly, she knows a little bit more about chronic illness personally and familially and through her family. And so, yeah, that helped. That helped with the process.
Mm. Yeah,
And
it
then
sounds.
having, of course, to get the actual book deal too. So,
Mm.
it was a lot for sure.
Yeah. Well, like, yeah, congratulations. I suppose we haven't said that
Thank
yet, but yeah,
you.
it's exciting for you, and I think, yeah, for
Yeah.
me, having followed you on Facebook and seeing the updates and
Yeah.
seeing some of the intricacies of producing the book, in terms of like some of the photo shoots that you've done, um, where you've talked about like getting the food just at the right temperature at the right time, and then like you've got
Mm-hmm.
to get photos of it before it starts to wilt and things like that because you want it to
Yeah.
look so vibrant, don't you? And so
Yeah.
some of those challenges
Oh, yeah.
is that must have been, and then your ME in the mix with that. So like
Oh
I
yeah.
think you talked on Facebook about like you've got a photo shoot the next day and then you just absolutely wiped out, and that must have been a huge
Yeah.
challenge for you.
Well, so how it ended up unfolding is I did the main bulk of it in LA. You have to have really a whole professional team. So I
Right.
accomplished most of that in a 12-day, it was like a 9-day shoot. We were there for 12 days for
Wow.
recovery and stuff, but it was a 9-day shoot with a full team. And they're cooking and shooting and there's assistants and it's a crazy
Wow.
situation. So that was a lot for me. But the ones that I've been doing recently that you've probably noticed, those are actually reshoots. And
Oh,
those
wow.
reshoots occur for a number of different reasons. Like some of them, we were shooting cranberries when they were off season. For example, this wasn't recent, a few months ago. We were shooting cranberries off season and they're really pink and mushy and all these things. And we had to kind of leave them whole. They didn't represent the end dish. And I thought that there's a practical need there for the food to look like the food. Somebody, if you have cognitive issues or just if you're scanning a page and you want to know if you want to make that recipe, I wanted the food to accurately represent that dish. So we reshot them. So there was a girl here locally that actually volunteered to make it so because I didn't have any more budget. The only rub here is that I've had to do the styling and I'm not a stylist. So that's what's been difficult. So the main shoot was done by a professional team, but the reshoots that you're seeing now on Facebook, we just concluded them. Um, those were all reshoots to kind of make them better than they were originally. Yeah.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah. Even something as simple as they didn't have in the studio I rented. They didn't have a Vitamix, and they had a kind of a not a very good blender, and all my smoothies and slushies looked much more textured. I wanted,
Right.
and you're going to look at that and go, "That's how much I'm supposed to blend it." Right? I needed it to be an accurate depiction, so we reshot those too. So yeah, that's basically what happened. And stuff happens, you're moving so quickly on a big shoot like that and accomplishing generally about 10 photos a day, which is a lot,
Wow.
So anyway, it's I can't believe I lived through it. I feel so fortunate, seriously, that I lived through it.
Is there a real challenge? Because to me, you seem like a real details person, and that's a really good attribute to
Yeah.
have. And is is there an element of like perfectionism there? And how do you manage that alongside the ME and not always being able to achieve what you want to achieve, given the energy level that you've got on any given day?
Yeah, it's super disappointing to put some effort in, especially when I'm styling food. I want something that looks professional. I'm not a professional. I have to rely on myself for these things. Yeah, and especially when you put forth an effort that practically kills you and you have to scrap
Hmm.
it. That's happened to me a number of times. You have to scrap it. So, yeah, but the bottom line is that a book lives in perpetuity, right? So it's not like,
Mm.
ooh, I posted this photo on Facebook. It's like what I kept telling my photographer, the one local that just helped me. I'm like, where can we live with these in perpetuity? If not, we got to reshoot them. And we reshot some of our own reshoots
Oh wow.
because we just were like, it's different when it's there forever. So yeah,
Mm.
perfectionism, but that's what makes a good product, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
It's
yeah,
so,
yeah. It's just it's managing that, isn't it? And
yeah,
yeah, we've talked before about like for me with my me and the podcast, like I think there's a certain point that you've got to kind of be prepared to, or for me anyway, in this circumstance, and I think every kind of creative endeavor is slightly different, but for me, it's like sometimes having to live with the fact that it's not perfect,
something
and
substandard.
yeah,
Yes.
and be okay with that to an extent,
Yeah. Yeah.
and that's always a challenge as well, isn't it? It's kind of like thinking, yeah, at what point is good enough, or not
I
good
know.
enough, and it's
I know.
it's hard, isn't
I
it?
mean,
Yeah,
there's many things. I mean, I can spot the flaws, right? I can look
yeah,
at any picture and say, "Oh, I wish if only that leaf were, a 16th of an inch to the right." I mean, it really comes down
wow,
to those things in food photography. So yeah,
yeah,
I could absolutely, but so you have to accept less than perfection. But, you also have a duty to your publisher who's investing in you, and you want something that has broad appeal. And so there's all these reasons to get it right, and then you just do the best you can.
Yeah. Do you want to tell us about maybe one or two of your favorite recipes from the book and why they're your favorites?
I brought a cheat sheet for my Emmy brain. Well, so what I would say is every recipe, there's some kind of strategy or solution behind it. And so many different things. Like, for example, all the soups in this book, I hope to do a second book, all the soups in this book are creamy. And that's just kind of what I was loving at the time, because I like they're blended, right? They're not brothy. So I think there are 8 of them. And that's for a variety of reasons. The idea that you can just throw veg in a pot, cook it, and then blend it up all silky with like coconut milk. And you've got a lot of nutrition there. It's essentially like a hot smoothie. So you've got a lot of nutrition. And for days that you don't even want to chew food, they're blended. So that is something that I think, as long as the ingredients can be tolerated, I think it'll have broad appeal. So much nutrition. They all freeze magically. So everything has like a purpose for being there, even if it doesn't suit each person. The everyday smoothie that we talked about earlier, that's for an everyday solution. That takes one meal off the table every single day. And in that same vein, there's a salad smoothie for that day that you can't bear to choke down another salad. When nutrition's really important to you, but you can't stare down another salad. It's like you just throw it in a blender. But I think the things that people will be most excited about probably are the cakes. They're almond flour cakes, and they're made with maple syrup.
Wow.
So they have a good lot of protein in them. The macros are pretty balanced, meaning like the fat, um, carbohydrate, fiber, all those things are in good balance. And there's like 4 ingredients, and you whisk them and you get them into the oven in like 10 minutes. So those are very doable, and they're casual. They're like 1-layer cakes. I have a couple 2-layer cakes, but they're 1-layer cakes, few minutes, they're in the oven. The ingredients are simple. Salmon, for people that really want to get, for the nutrition, really want wild salmon in their diet. Maybe they don't love it. They need some other flavors around it. Or like me, in the winter months when wild salmon is not in season and you have to buy it frozen, and it's usually sockeye, sockeye is a lot more dense and a lot more robustly flavored. So for me, I love salmon, summer salmon, but in the winter, I want dishes with a lot of flavor to kind of, I guess not mute the salmon, but just soften, those flavors a little bit. So there's always a strategy. Let me see if I can find, there's a lot of cakes and a lot of treats for sure. There's truffles that are made with tahini. Um, there's a dinner that's a 10-minute dinner that I wasn't going to put in the book, but my friend Austin, who also has ME, he's made it so many times. He's like, it has to go in the book. It really is 10 minutes.
Oh, wow.
So stuff like that, if people have feedback and I wasn't sure about it. I guess the only other thing I want to mention is, there's muffins, there's all kinds of the salads. There's an opportunity to use like rotisserie chicken or something that you don't have to make. That makes it easier. So, but last thing I'll mention is this tahini dip that has about this much parsley in it. But with the tahini and the other ingredients, so the thought was parsley is incredibly nutritious. We usually eat like a little sprig of it, and it's pretty astringent. But with all these other ingredients, you can get quite a lot of nutrition, and it's really flavorful. So it's just like strategies, I guess, for nutrition and good food and ease. Yeah.
Yeah, and I've certainly enjoyed having the smoothie, and it's been good, and I've enjoyed doing it. So yeah, it's certainly, I think I'll be keen to kind of get hold of the book and then look at what recipes that I can tempt my family into trying as well.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's my plan. So yeah, it's going to be exciting. And have you got? Are there going to be lots of like plans for when, in terms of like how to manage your ME levels when the book comes out, and because I guess there's a lot of
Yeah.
publicity that's needed. I mean, just coming on here, it's brilliant. You're doing this for us,
Yeah.
but it's going to wear you out, isn't it? So.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, I'm still hatching a plan for that. It'll be in concert with my publisher, but of course, strategic. Yeah. So I think
Mm,
podcasts are a really good tool for me. They're not without consequence, but I think that still it's certainly better than in person for me. And uh, podcasts, you can also speak directly to that audience and their own specific needs, tailor it a
mm,
bit to each audience. So I'll be looking for podcasts and yeah, I mean, we're just making those plans now, but they have to be what my energy will allow. And who knows?
mm.
And the other thing is, it's kind of a fluid situation. Where will I be in a year from now in terms of health? I could
Yeah.
be going either direction. So,
Mm,
so we'll see. We'll try
yeah.
to create as much of an ME proof plan, I guess, as possible. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And some of the proceeds from the sales of the book are going to go to ME charities.
Yeah.
Have you thought a lot about kind of where that's going and things?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's going to go through OMF, but I think that closer to the date, when we can take a look at the current research and where things sit and where it makes the most sense for that money to go, we'll sort of route it through OMF and have them kind of, yeah, help us make those decisions and stuff. Yeah.
Mm, yeah. Well, it's been brilliant to talk, and yeah, I really I look forward to the book coming out, and we'll champion it on the podcast as and when it
Thank
sort of comes
you.
closer. And it's been a real enjoyable experience having you on the podcast and
Thank
for
you.
you to be
It's
able to sort
great to
of
be
share
here.
your story. Are there any other things that we missed that we were going to talk about? How do we get hold of you? How do we follow you? How do we pre-order the book? When does that happen? All that sort of thing.
Well, hopefully when it's time for pre-order, well, if anybody follows me on social media, they'll certainly hear about it. I'm on Instagram at food.phenom. And we can always list those links if that's okay. I've got a
Yeah, yeah,
Substack
yeah.
newsletter too. I'm on Facebook all the time. So I'm pretty easy to find, but hopefully everybody will hear about it. OMF will help get the word out. Health
Mm.
Rising will help get the word out when that time comes. Pre-sale is usually a good 6 to 8 months in advance, so it should be no later than the beginning of the year for pre-sale. So, yeah, I appreciate you helping me get the word out, and we still have a
Yeah.
little ways to go, but
It's exciting,
yeah,
isn't it? And it's going to feel brilliant for you to like literally like hold it in your hand and things and feel that sense of achievement because it's anything when you're living with such significant levels
yeah,
of exhaustion it feels
yeah.
like an achievement. So that's going to be massive, isn't it?
I almost can't believe it. It was
Yeah.
so hard won. I almost don't know if I'll believe it until I feel it in my hands, like you said. But it's nice to have something tangible to show for all my years of work, and moreover, I think just a resource for people, and more broadly, just people that care about nutrition. So
Mm.
just provide a good resource is important to me. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's all and for those of us, it's all like a learning curve because I've learned a
Yeah.
bit about yeah, just about like
Yeah.
things like the how good Brazil nuts are for you as well.
Oh
So,
yeah.
so
Selenium. Yay,
yeah,
selenium. Yeah.
so it feels like I think the nutrition thing feels like it feels sort of daunting in a sense that it learning about kind of the impact and sometimes it's you don't want to know sometimes do you when you're eating junk and stuff but
Yeah.
I think there's also a sense of like learning about food and its impact on your
Hmm.
body and different foods
Yeah.
and things it's such a really good thing but it feels quite daunting as well so and I think the way that you communicate is brilliant and I think you can bring that to people in a really effective way to make people think
Thank
okay
you.
it's trying to simplify it, isn't it? To think, well, this is why you would
Yeah.
eat this with this, and this is why it's good for you. So
And you
yeah,
just
it's
start simply and master one recipe at a time. Believe it or not, most people, they say, only have like 8 recipes in their repertoire.
yeah.
So it's not like, I mean, if you even just find a couple that you really love and you can go back to again and again, that's a great tool to have in the box. But I think
Mm,
hopefully, whole foods make people also feel better. And then that's the motivation for continuing. I don't mean curing MS. I mean, I wish that were true, right? But I feel so much worse when I don't eat whole foods. I go rogue occasionally when I have amnesia, and maybe I can get away with it this time. So I guess that's my hope too, is people that haven't really given it a shot, just like preparing as much of their own food as possible, staying away from ultra processed foods. I guess that's really it, is a tool
mm,
to stay away from ultra processed foods. And you're in the
mm.
UK, so I was telling you about Deliciously Ella, right? Did you look them up?
I looked at the website. Yeah, yeah. I haven't bought anything off
Yeah.
there yet, but I've been looking at it. Yeah.
So if I were in the UK, especially when I was at my absolute worst, they have some prepared foods that don't contain any additives or anything. That's that's what I would do in my most desperate times, probably, is just they've got frozen food and energy balls and bars and things like that. I think they're coming to the US, but right now they're readily available in the UK. And I mean, I don't work with them in any way. I'm just saying, as like a tool, everybody needs some kind of tool that's within reach. And
Mm.
in the UK, that's what I would do if I were in the UK.
Yeah,
So,
yeah, yeah, and it's finding the things that make yeah that process as easy as possible, doesn't it? And like you say, some days maybe trying to cook something and then freezing it, or yeah, like soups and things like that. And
oh yeah,
it is always a challenge, and yeah, there's such a spectrum in terms of like what we're trying to manage on some days and other days, and yeah, it's trying to
yes,
find that path through. So
it's a big juggling act.
I hope your book is helpful to people
Thank you. I
who
really do too.
can step out and try and to do some
Yeah.
stuff. So,
Yeah.
thanks so
Thank
much
you.
for your time. It's been brilliant to
Thank
talk and
you, Dan. It
meet you
was fun
properly as
hanging
well. So,
out, and
yeah,
I appreciate your time. Thanks.
yeah, thank you. Goodbye.